Welcome to the weekly podcast of First United Methodist Church in Costa Mesa, California. Founded in 1912, the church gathers on Sundays at 10 a.m., and we invite you to join us anytime. For more information, visit our website, CostaMesaFirstUMC.com, or connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Every year, and by every year I mean we did it last year, so this is the second annual, we have wanted to do a series where we do sort of like practical theology. What do I mean by that? I mean kind of how does the way that we view God help us in how we engage the world? And as David and I were working on this last year, we talked about all these sort of big topics that you hear, whether it's LGBTQI inclusion, all the things that sometimes you almost hear in the prayer requests. How, if we grew up with different beliefs, or how can we sort of move closer to each other in this? So we called this Across the Room. Because for some of you, this church is very different than the church you grew up in, or maybe you didn't grow up in a church at all. And so even talking to your family members or coworkers, it's really hard to engage in these conversations. So we wanted to sort of give some language to that. And so we have been really made aware that we are not experts in any of this. So this, last year we did all kinds of topics. This year we have 4 topics for you, which I think are going to be great. Mental health, the environmental crisis, right? That's going to be a good one too. We're also going to talk about homelessness, which will be really, again, one of the pressing issues here in Costa Mesa. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the idea of sort of violence and peacemaking is our last one. So we have brought experts. Reed, I'm making you an expert. He is absolutely an expert in mental health. I want to give you a little information about him, but if you look in the bulletin, you can see he has done a lot of work in this area of serving folks, helping them move into sort of a different way of looking at the world. And as we've talked about mental health, I wanted to share that Bible verse with you, because for me, that was a Bible verse that was really problematic when I was going through difficult times. It's rejoice always. Sometimes we have been told our faith means that we won't have mental health issues, but friends, we know that's not true. Really unhelpful language, like if you just pray hard enough, you'll move past it. So we're going to bring Reed forward to hear kind of a little bit more. Reed, if you'll come and sit in this chair here, and this I'm going to turn on. There you go. Reed asked for a mic because he wanted to do a Britney dance, and I said no. So only one of us gets the diva mic today.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you'll tell us a little bit about your story and why mental health is important for you, and you feel free. We're all, and it is being recorded, so just I feel like you should know that. But if you'll share a little bit about yourself, whatever you'd like to share with us, that'd be great.
Well, first off, thanks for having me. When Sarah asked me to come and talk, it's been a while since I've spoken at a church, so I'm glad to be back. And that's kind of part of why I was excited to talk about mental health when this conversation came up, because for me, the church actually was a place that helped actually facilitate a desire to get to know and want to care for lots of different types of people. I grew up with parents who were in the camping ministry, Christian camping. If you go to camp for a weekend or a summer camp, that's kind of what my parents did. And so I got to be a little kid growing up, having people come from the city, from the beaches, from the countryside, all over. And I got to watch adults in high school and junior high kids love each other, care for each other. And that to me was a major, just eye-opening experience of learning to enjoy and participate in lots of different ways to do life. So for me, that was really the church, or that Jesus really was the opening for me to appreciate and to find how I can be in the world and allow other people to be in the world and enjoy and love each other. And so for me, that's why the church is such a beautiful, not all churches, of course, but I think the church in general is a place where things like this, we can come together and actually listen to each other. We actually can learn from each other's experiences. We can ask questions. We don't have to know all the answers. And we can appreciate the many different flavors of life that are out there. And so for me, the church, again, was that place. So coming back and speaking at a church is a beautiful thing. And that really what spurred me out of doing kind of church ministry and young life for a long time was to actually want to get into psychology. Because for me, I wanted to continue to help. How do I walk alongside people who have different experiences, different struggles, different realities, and be that kind, caring person that just walks along with them. And so that's really how I got into psychology. That's how I got into the mental health field, was Jesus said, how can you live out this gracious, inclusive part of what I'm about in the world? And so psychology was the way that really triggered me into how I want to do that. And so that's how I got into mental health.
Well, so then as we talk about that, we talk about how, so people have different reactions to mental health. I mentioned earlier that some people say, you can pray away lots of things, but you can pray away, like if you have a difficult feeling or that sort of stuff. And so there's all these challenges in regards to mental health and faith communities. What do you think are the big challenges to people seeing the value or understanding mental health, if you think about faith communities or communities like this?
I think there's probably, I would say, there's one big one that I think I experience with people, not just like doing talk therapy, psychotherapy with people, but also when I'm teaching students at Vanguard. And I think the biggest thing when helping people understand mental health is, I think for a lot of us, whether we like it or not, or there's just a fear. There's a fear factor. And I think in churches, I think there can be a fear when there's things that maybe we don't have a lot of experiences with, or we can get fear when we don't have a lot of information about someone or a diagnosis or a topic. And so whether it's on purpose or accidental, which typically it's accidental when we get fear, we go into a non-creative mode. And we go into a tightening. When we get anxious and nervous, we don't want to be open. And we don't want to be exploring options and creativity. And so I think fear in the church can be a big one. I think people have past experiences with faith communities. And some of those have been really hurtful. And some of those have been really demeaning and misunderstanding. And so I think people shy away from the church at times because they're not sure where their diagnosis, or they're not sure where their mental health fits or their personality fits in a church. And so I think one of the barriers is fear for churches and worldview of how do we learn to allow, again, in therapy I use flavors, many different flavors of life, people coming from lots of different walks of life, different experiences. How can we create room? I think Sarah's going to talk about at the table. How do we create room of someone's experience and who they are so that we can learn and we can let them feel safe? We can let ourselves feel safe, because whether or not we have a mental health disorder, we are all human. And so we all have our quirks and we all have our funny things about ourselves.
Not here, not in this space. Nope.
Yeah. And so I think we all want that acceptance. And so I think fear is the biggest thing that can make a church or some sort of faith community shy away from people. And so I think the more that we can expose that fear, the more we can come alongside and comfort that fear, I think that will open us up to being people where people with lots of different mental health conditions feel safe, they feel understood, and then the church can actually be a wonderful place for repair and a really wonderful place of healing.
That's awesome. So if we were to talk about, we call this issue like on earth as it is in heaven, right? How do you think that would look? What would it look like if we're designing a space? Because you and I talked earlier about how there really isn't a safe space, right? So what would a kingdom space look like? What do you feel like? How would things be different in how church communities or even people of faith would engage mental health?
Yeah, I think that people of faith, I think that this morning is a great example of that, right? There's an example where we can use lots of different language and understanding for one another, that we're not all having the same experience. And so that's okay. There's actually nothing wrong with that at all. And so if we can create places like this, if we can have places where we can have meals together, if we can create places where people can come because financially they need help, right? People need food, clothing, shelter. I think what the church can do, and I think how we make it, on earth as it is in heaven, is we can be the people that are actually creating and working in and giving resources to hospitals, to shelters, to therapy centers. We're creating moments where people can have meals together and they can be understood, places to share holidays. I mean, literally the practical hands and feet, I think, of what we all are wanting and needing. And so I think how the church can be a part of that and is to be, I think, part of these to help. I think there's two types of tables. There's like the personal table, and then there's like the system social table. And I think that as a church, maybe for you as an individual on a smaller scale, to open up your table, and that just means not just for meals, but the table is in finances, time, your energy, and allowing space for other types of people in it to care. But then I also think there's a larger table, right? There's the society table of structure that I think the church has an unbelievable ability to actually do some change, like we've seen in the evangelical church, we've seen in the Catholic Church, to actually have a real voice to help change practical, big systems, again, like hospitals, like healthcare, to really actually help people get more support that they need.
So we talked about a little bit about what's holding us back from that. So on an individual level, what do you think holds people back from either engaging their own mental health or engaging the mental health of others? I know that's two big ones. So if you'll start there, and then I'll...
Yeah, so I think that one, again, I think is fear, right? I think so an individual, approximately 20% of people have a mental health illness or a condition, right? And so about 20% of us, right, have some sort of diagnosable mental health condition. And then there's a whole percentage of people that we don't know because they're not coming forward. And so then that number really is larger because fear and shame are massive, massive emotional experiences that just keep us in hiding. And so I think that the more we don't always have to like, but I think the more that we can accept and appreciate ourselves and the things that we're going through, I think the more we're going to be able to accept and appreciate things that someone else is going through. And some of us have that flip. Some of us are much more easier at giving grace and understanding and patience and kindness to somebody else. We have maybe more of a difficult time of doing that to ourselves. So I think fear and shame on an individual level are what keep people from seeking help. And I think that then the church in that moment can actually facilitate conversations like this, create support groups, things that actually allow you to say, no, these things don't feel good, we don't enjoy them, we're not stoked about them, but they're here. Just like other things like cancer and diabetes and high blood pressure. There's no difference. These aren't somehow radical different things, mental health and things like cancer and diabetes. But I think some of us have a different feeling about cancer and diabetes than we do mental health. And we really have to tear that wall down because that's just made up in our head. They're not actually different. They have different symptoms, but they are medical problems. And so I think the more we can accept ourselves and accept that we're all people that need love, care, kindness, and some attention, then I think that actually will help us move along.
We had a former staff member who moved away, but John Krupivkin, one of the things that he taught me that I thought was so great is that, the greatest commandment is that we're to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And he said, we're really good sometimes at loving our neighbor, but it's the loving ourself piece that makes it hard to love our neighbor. So he was saying, it has to be a balance. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about. The other thing I was thinking, I would love to hear your response on this. So if someone, has cancer, we don't label them as, this person is the person who has cancer. But I think oftentimes with mental illness, instead of saying this is someone who is struggling with, we put that diagnosis before their identity. Do you feel like there is helpful language or anything that we can do, even in our own conversations, to make it, my friend's kid, for instance, is like, please don't say my kid is autistic and instead say my kid has autism. Do you hear the difference? His identity is not that, it's that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So if you think about it, think about the last time you had the flu. You didn't say, when people ask, oh, how are you doing? You're like, oh, I am the flu. You said, I have the flu, right? I have it. It's something that's happening. It's a happening in my life, but I am not it. That's not my mind, my spirit, my core, but I have it, right? So there's an acknowledgement that there is something, but I am not it. But it's with me. So I think that's the kind of language where we talk about, I have this, right? Just like I have cancer, I have diabetes, I have high blood pressure. You don't say, I am high blood pressure, right? And so I think that usage can be helpful in identifying that, yes, this is something that I'm dealing with, because we don't want to shy away from that. But I do think it's something that we want to recognize, that it's not your whole being. Just like if you break your arm, you are not broken arm. You have a broken arm. And so you want to clarify the differences.
That is super helpful. So those are some of the things that are holding you back. You mentioned a little bit, but I'd love to dig in. What can like an average person who wants to know how they can either be more supported with their own mental health or get the support for others in mental health? And by the way, guys, we know that we have a very short amount of time to just start digging into this. Right. And when there's, it might be sparking things in you. So this is really just a moment for us to offer you someone who is a resource and start the conversation. Because remember when we talked about the idea that like we just want to start the conversation and not shy away from them. And for some people that's uncomfortable, but it needs to happen. And so even in prayer requests, as we're talking about a gift, Sevi, actually, for you to share with us your daughter's struggle. Because I think when we normalize it, it's really helpful. And so I just want to make sure you know that we weren't hoping to like solve the issue of mental health in like 15 minutes. But we would love to, in a moment, I am going to let you ask a couple questions. We've got like time for 2, if you feel brave, okay? All right. But before that, the average person, how can they be help or help others for themselves?
I think the first one is education and just knowledge. I think knowledge is power. So I think the first one, like in a church community as an individual, it really is to get information, is to actually get some information across from about bipolar disorder, about depression, about anorexia, about substance use, about these topics. So that can actually, because I think information can actually really open people up to understanding how big the world is. And so one is information. I think the second thing is if no one's expecting the average person to be a clinician and solve all these. These are big topics. They're not super simple all the time. But I think if you can be someone who knows the suicide hotline, you're someone who knows, hey, I know a number to Orange County Behavioral Health. Or, hey, I know some places, some resources that I can offer you that I can either take you to, I can give you their phone number, right? And actually be someone who, as you're getting information, can also learn what in my community are the resources for people who are needing this kind of help.
So you mentioned 2. So there's the suicide prevention and Orange County Behavioral Health. Are there others that you'd want?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for more information, NAMI, NAMI, the National Association of Mental Institutions, they have great information on there. Mentalhealth.gov also has a lot of resources on there that just talk about the whole like kind of spectrum of mental health and resources and information and things to do. And so I think those are good places just to be a person of information and help. And I think really the third one is in the role that you can be and in the way that you can do it, be a gracious, kind person. Right? Like,
just make that a rule.
Just like
be a gracious, kind person. That's the next sign we're putting on the bell tower.
I think be people that can sit with, and I think whether again that's sharing your own finances, your own meals, creating support groups at a church like this, creating Bible studies, creating just a hangout, going and grabbing meals with people, and just being another kind person in this world that actually is spending time. I mean, research shows us time and time again the power of social connection. And so I think as a church, being socially connected to people, it may not solve everything, but that is a powerful force. And so I think really those 3 areas are things that can be really important to help practically, to get people care, to get people help. And, I think, again, part of that is getting people the resources, whether it's therapy, psychiatry, it's the doctor, those types of conversations.
That's really helpful. Actually, as I was driving this morning, as the news was trying to make sense of what's been going on with these mass shootings, one of the people suggested that we are in a crisis of loneliness, and that people are acting out in ways that they wouldn't normally if they were in a community. And so I think that as you're hearing this, whether it affects you personally, it is affecting people around you. And so it's helpful to have these ideas and ways of connecting. So I would have, if anyone is feeling brave, Chris, you're feeling brave, as always. Brave, yeah, you've got a loud enough voice. What's your question?
Slammed me in the ear. I felt like now I know how a football player feels, and just dealing with our mentally ill, because a lot of these guys make me feel uncomfortable.
Safety is an issue. That's a great question. What do we do when safety is an issue? Great question,
So
Chris.
that's a good point. Even I think with everything in the news, I think usually what I start to hear, which is frustrating, is when there's a mass shooting that some folks, they bring up the conversation of mental health, and it's like, okay, yes, like we need to be talking about this more. This affects everyone. So the more we can get in schools, families to be supportive and have positive mental health, it affects all of us. I think he brings up a good point. Really, people with mental health really are only 3 to 5% of those who commit violent crimes. People with mental health are actually 10 times more likely to be victims of violence than they are to be giving violence. So I think there's a misunderstanding here, and Chris brings up a good point, is that people that are struggling with different mental health barriers, they actually are really suffering on the violence, aggression, and which then does not help. So we keep the cycle going. So I think that's a big part, because safety, if you don't have safety in this world, it's really hard to do higher tier type things if you aren't safe.
Right.
So physical safety, food, clothing, shelter, those are really important. And I think that with people with mental health go down with issues in that area, they then suffer from more violence, and then the cycle just continues.
You're mentioning something that's really helpful. We talk about intersectionality, right? So the idea that, yes, this week we're talking about mental health, but then we're going to be talking about housing, and we're going to be talking about how all these things kind of, in some ways, we've either rightfully connected them or wrongfully connected them. And so that's really helpful to hear the statistic. Yes, David in the back.
How can you help us overcome that? What does it look like to call you to help us or create journeys?
That was our next question. I promise I didn't plant David on that. Yes.
Yeah, going to therapy can be really scary for people. I tell people when they come into my office, I'm like, this is the second scariest thing you've done with your mental health. The first one's going to be coming back for round 2. Coming back the second time, because it's scary. It's a vulnerable thing to try to, whether you're going to a doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, a social worker who you don't know, and then here you are divulging all these things, and you don't know what's going to happen, what they're going to think, where they're going to go with it. That is just a vulnerable place to be. So I think if you're someone who's wanting to assist someone to make that step, or you want to be kind of that resource to be encouraging, I think information's one, but I think the second one is participating and finding out where are the local nonprofits, counseling centers, where are the people, and actually start to build some relationships, right?
Are there some here? Are there I know for some of us in the room, maybe we want to get our own mental health taken care of, but one of the big barriers, I think, is insurance and getting that covered. Are there local resources that if we needed to engage in would be either a sliding scale or something that's easy?
So this is my shameless plug.
Also didn't plant me to say that, by the way, guys.
So yeah, there's lots. So Journeys Counseling, which is the center that I work for, is a nonprofit. organization here in Costa Mesa, Huntington Beach, that we see people from $5, $10, $20, $175, right? There's a whole scale of people who come in. There are, I know, other types of organizations and churches that have like lay counselors and people that are there for just talk support. Orange County Behavioral Health, I mentioned that before, for people who are like Cal Optima, Medi-Cal. Orange County Behavioral Health that's a place to look into, and there's a website, there's phone numbers that really for people who want to use like Medi-Cal, which there's a big population of people that use Medi-Cal. Insurance is a tricky business when it comes to healthcare, which is one of the reasons why churches need to advocate more for that. So I think places like Journeys, and off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of many more, but I know there are other places out there.
SIFT.
Yeah, SIFT's another one that's out there that I think can be really helpful for whatever your financial place is. And those SIFT and Journeys will find people that fit your financial need, your health need.
We're going to put links on that too by the podcast, by the way, too, guys, so that if you want to write it. And we gave you a nice piece of paper you could write it down on.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing, Dave, to go back to what Dave was saying, I think is to find that, to be that support when someone goes into therapy. You can be someone they call afterwards and say, how was it? How'd it go? Do you feel like you're getting some good help? Right? So that they feel like if they go talk to a therapist, they go talk to a psychiatrist, they have a friendly face afterwards they can see or talk to know that they're not alone in going into their therapy or going in to see their doctor or psychiatrist. There's someone they can process with. There's someone that they know, I have this intimate relationship with someone, which is encouraging to go.
All right, so our final question, I think I saw Grace. Did you have a question? You just got a shout out for that. A woo is the first time that like a behavioral thing has ever got a woo. That was great. Yeah, so there is lots of resources, and we'll make sure those are up. Can we pray together and thank Reed? I know, Reed, I didn't ask you this, but I am sure you would be willing if people wanted to chat with you after, not too long because he has his wonderful family here, but I'm sure he would be able to give you more resources. So let's pray together, shall we? God, we are grateful and challenged by difference. And sometimes we forget that life has different ways of looking at it and different lenses through which we see it. And sometimes mental health challenges provide a lens that we don't understand for ourselves or others. God, for those in the room today who need to hear that it's okay for them to seek help, God, we are grateful. And for those of us who need to be support, God, give us strength. Help us to know that it's not the words. As Reed said, it's just about sharing a grace-filled moment. Would you give us that grace? And will we let go of any fear that we may have when we encounter the other? Lord, we are grateful for the work that Reed does, especially working with students in such a difficult transitional time. We thank you for his grace and for those folks he works with as well. God, would you continue to use him in incredible ways to give people peace? It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Can we clap? Methodists don't usually do this, but can we clap and thank Reed? There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Reed, so much for being here.